After the unfortunate disappointment that was the season premiere, I'm so happy to say that this week we got one of, if not the best episodes of the entire show thus far. Level 10 acting from the majority of the cast, coupled with incredible character writing, made this episode truly a masterpiece. Don't get me wrong, it does have some issues, but they were by no means detractory enough to ruin the viewing experience in any way. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode. We begin with an incredibly well-crafted opening sequence, showing all of the staff in the Red Keep being rounded up in the immediate aftermath of Jaehaerys' murder by Blood and Cheese. This scene manages to perfectly convey the nightmarish, chaotic feeling of being awoken in the middle of the night to something awful happening. This showcasing of the weight of the situation on the staff quickly transitions to their king, as we see Aegon in the throes of a brutal, incredibly realistic meltdown. We see him tragically destroy his father Viserys' model of a Valyrian city, one we saw Viserys building as a hobby over the course of the majority of Season 1. As is made more evident later in the episode, this is likely symbolic of Aegon's destruction of his father's peaceful legacy in favor of violent vengeance. As Aegon continues his justifiable meltdown into an emergency meeting of the small council, we see Otto immediately try to use the death of his great-grandson for political gain. He suggests that a public funeral procession, surrounded with accusatory rhetoric toward Rhaenyra, would do wonders for the Green faction's cause. This is yet another example of Otto completely disregarding the emotional struggles of his family in favor of political progress. A key theme in this episode, and more broadly throughout the show as a whole, is generational trauma. We see Otto completely neglect his daughter Alicent's emotional needs and struggles multiple times throughout this episode, forcing her to ride in the funeral procession or refusing to hear her confession of her affair with Kristen. We later see Alicent doing much of the same with Aegon, choosing not to comfort him when she walks in on him crying alone. We also see Aegon refusing to comfort or even talk to Helaena in the aftermath of the brutal trauma she underwent. We see Aemond returning to the prostitute he visited in his youth, using her not for sex but for the emotional comfort that he can't get from his family. He actually ends up revealing important information to her in a position of vulnerability and trust, so I just wonder if any of that information will trickle out of secrecy, maybe towards someone more prominent in the King's Landing underworld. But that's a side tangent for another day. This neglect is by no means exclusive to the Green faction, as we see Daemon blatantly ignore his daughter Baela in this episode as well. This pattern of emotional neglect is such a driving force in the behavior of the characters, and I think due to its format, the show does an even stronger job of conveying this core theme than the book Fire and Blood did. Prior to the funeral procession, we again see this pattern on full display as Alicent fails to give Helaena the emotional support that she needs, forcing her daughter to participate in the procession just as her father had forced her to. We see that the knitting project Helaena was working on in the previous episode was actually a funeral garb for Jaehaerys, further showcasing that she had seen visions of her son's murder prior to it happening. As someone with a lot of anxiety, the funeral procession sequence shot mine through the roof. From the stalling of the carriage to the swarming crowd to Helena's panic attack, this scene was conveyed so well that I could barely watch. Back on Dragonstone, we see Rhaenyra learning of the Blood and Cheese incident for the first time, her rage justifiable, as Helaena, and especially her child, were completely innocent in this conflict. We as the audience know that, especially having just lost her son herself, Rhaenyra would never commit an atrocity like this. However, with even members of her own council questioning whether she did, how is the rest of the realm, who doesn't even know her directly, going to believe her? Though she doesn't immediately suspect Daemon, he just can't help himself from smirking away, leading Rhaenyra to quickly realize the true culprit behind the incident. This transitions us into an incredible scene in which Rhaenyra finally seems to understand the depths of Daemon's true colors, and that she simply can't love and trust him anymore. Like in many real-life doomed relationships, she saw Daemon as someone she could fix, a challenge she could overcome. But as in reality, this simply was not the case. Daemon only truly cares about one person, himself. We even see him have to consciously stop himself from assaulting Rhaenyra multiple times, further showcasing his true nature to her and us viewers. I know I said this last season, but if you still consider yourself a Daemon stan at this point, you are severely misguided. But then again, Aemond is my favorite character, so who am I to talk? After Rhaenyra sends Daemon away, he departs on his dragon for the Riverlands, seemingly beating Aemond, who hasn't yet left King's Landing, to the punch. Upon Daemon's departure, Rhaenyra summons his daughter Baela. She's ordered to fly toward King's Landing on Dragonback to monitor any potential dragon-based moves the Green faction might make. We don't see Baela depart just yet, however. Instead, we get a nice scene between her and Jaehaerys, both reflecting on their daddy issues. They even talk openly about his bastardry, indicating that the two have a clear trust and bond between each other. Rhaenyra later summons Mysaria to her chambers. Before Mysaria's arrival, however, we see Rhaenyra in a library room of sorts, perusing old books and scrolls containing the history of her family. As a huge lore nerd, I really hope we can get some new revelations from these seemingly abundant texts. Rhaenyra's reading, however, is interrupted by Mysaria's arrival. Mysaria seems to blame the destruction of her home and her subsequent need to flee King's Landing on Otto, who she assumes must have seen her as a threat after her hiding of Aegon back in Season 1. However, we viewers know that it was Larys who put the destruction of her home into action. Does Mysaria not yet know of Larys' true nature as a spy master like herself? No, Rhaenyra initially doesn't really understand Mysaria's goals or nature, she soon realizes that this is someone she has met before. Mysaria was the very woman that was by Daemon's side in episode 2 of season 1. If you recall, Daemon had fled to Dragonstone with Mysaria and had stolen some dragon eggs, telling everyone that he was to marry her despite already being married and that she was pregnant with his child. With Viserys' small council unsure how to handle the situation, young Rhaenyra flew there on Dragonback and confronted Daemon herself. Realizing that Mysaria was yet another woman lied to and betrayed by Daemon like herself, sympathy emerges. In turn, she decides to honor Daemon's promise to let Mysaria go, giving her passage on a ship heading toward the eastern continent of Essos, where she is originally from. However, as we see Mysaria figure out Arryk's twin trickery later in the episode, we might end up seeing Rhaenyra having her stick around a little bit longer. Back in King's Landing, we see that Aegon hastily had all the ratcatchers in his employment hung in the streets. After learning from Blood that Cheese was indeed one of them, he acted in haste, having all of them killed rather than narrowing down which one actually did the deed. Much to Otto's dismay, this completely reverses the political favor they had won from the small folk with the funeral procession. Learning of this sends Otto into a fit of rage, giving us an Emmy-worthy tirade from Rhys Ifans. The act of his calm, calculated demeanor melts away, allowing for all of the bottled-up frustration he had with Aegon to come crashing out. Still desperate for vengeance from the murder of his son, Aegon's desire for violent action, coupled with the advice he got from Larys in last episode, leads him to dismiss Otto as Hand, instead giving the role to Criston Cole. Earlier in the episode, in a fit of projecting his own behavior onto others, we see Criston berate Arryk and send him to go slay Rhaenyra on his own. Since Arryk's twin brother Eric is a member of Rhaenyra's Kingsguard, he could infiltrate Dragonstone by pretending to be him. In his firing of Otto and appointment of Criston, Aegon shows that he prefers Criston's abrupt, action-oriented approach over the calculated political cunning of his grandfather. Before leaving King's Landing, however, Otto visits his daughter Alicent one last time to fill her in on the news. Though she obviously wants him to stay, he can't bear to stick around to witness all of the hard work he put into steering Aegon crumble before his eyes. He then says something truly surprising, that he will return to Old Town to counsel Daeron. I was absolutely shocked to hear this, as I thought Daeron was a character they cut from the show entirely. You see, in the book, in addition to Aegon, Aemond, and Helaena, Alicent had a fourth child with Viserys, one named Daeron. However, rather than be raised in King's Landing like his siblings, he was sent to Old Town to serve as a squire for House Hightower. Since he had no mention or appearance in Season 1, I, like most fans, assumed he simply was cut from the show for the sake of character condensation. However, it seems that Daeron indeed exists in the show, and based on Otto's expressed desire to instruct him, he will possibly be entering the story soon. To me, this method of introducing Daeron was very poor writing. Why was he not shown or even mentioned back in Season 1 if they planned on including him in the story? At Viserys' final dinner, he even reflects on his whole family being in one place, yet we now know that one of his sons was all the way over in Old Town. Anyway, I hope the show gives us a good explanation as to why Daeron hasn't been mentioned yet, as opposed to just continuing to shoehorn him in. Before departing from that scene, however, Alicent suggests Otto travel to Highgarden before returning home. Highgarden is the seat of House Tyrell, who you probably remember from Game of Thrones. Though they are a vassal house to the Hightowers and should be completely loyal to the Green faction, Alicent indicates that their support seems to be wavering. Before we get to the Eric vs. Arryk duel that served as the climax of the episode, though weirdly wasn't the final scene, I wanted to go over a few quick points that didn't really fit in anywhere else. Last episode, we were introduced to Alan of Hull, a soldier and shipwright that Corlys seemed to take a keen interest in. This week, we see Alan reunited with his brother Adam. Adam tries to encourage Alan to actually set sail with Corlys once the fleet is ready, explaining that all who travel with him seem to gain riches and glory. However, Adam also indicates that Corlys owes them for some reason that isn't yet revealed. We then later see Adam staring to the sky, admiring the flight of a dragon that used to belong to Laenor. Back in King's Landing, we are once again shown Hugh Hammer, the blacksmith that petitioned Aegon for advance payment in last week's episode. It seems that his daughter is seriously ill, and that his wife is having a hard time getting food due to the growing Black faction blockade of King's Landing. Though Aegon did promise financial relief for the blacksmiths, with the death of his son, Hugh and his wife are left wondering if that relief will ever actually come. With those points out of the way, let's dive into the climax of this episode. After the pressure we discussed from Criston Cole, Arryk infiltrates Dragonstone by pretending to be his twin brother Eric, who is a member of Rhaenyra's Kingsguard. As we discussed, Mysaria catches on to this, and that likely gives Eric enough time to find his brother before he assassinates Rhaenyra. The two then engage in a brutal duel in front of Rhaenyra, from which Eric emerges the victor. Unable to live with the guilt of having killed his own brother, however, he commits suicide directly in front of his queen. Rhaenyra just can't catch a break as yet another traumatic incident hits her head on. This scene serves as a potent reminder of the nature of this Westerosi civil war, that, at its core, is a family divided, and a house divided against itself cannot stand. Well, that's it for this week's breakdown. If there's anything you think I might have missed, or any questions you might have, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see future episode breakdowns, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week for Season 2, Episode 3.